They got married on a dare. But this time, Iris wanted Claire with no contract, no excuse, and no way back. Welcome to the bonus episode of Claire and Iris Love Story. This is an original story. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental. A few weeks after the contract stopped mattering, Claire Donovan discovered that peace was much more disruptive than chaos. Chaos, at least, had structure. It came with sharp edges, clear reactions, and the useful illusion that if she stayed composed enough, fast enough, elegant enough, she could outmaneuver it. Peace was worse. Peace slept in her bed with dark blonde hair spread over her pillow and one bare leg tangled in expensive sheets. Peace stole the side of the blanket Claire preferred and left coffee cups in the sink with complete moral confidence. Peace wandered through Claire's apartment in one of Claire's white shirts, barefoot and half awake, and somehow made the entire penthouse feel less like property and more like a life. Which Claire had privately come to accept was a far greater threat to her long-term stability than a reckless pool bet had ever been. She stood barefoot in the kitchen just after 7, one hand around a mug of black coffee, the city still soft beyond the windows. Manhattan had not fully sharpened yet. The light was pale and silver over the buildings, and everything below looked briefly suspended in that rare, expensive silence New York only gave people before the rest of the world woke up and started asking for things. Claire liked that hour. It was useful, predictable, controlled. Then Iris came into the kitchen and ruined all of it. Not dramatically. That was the issue. Iris didn't ruin Claire's morning like a storm. She ruined it like a habit. She walked in wearing one of Claire's oversized shirts, white, slightly wrinkled, sleeves rolled without discipline, and paused in the doorway with the drowsy expression of a woman who had no idea she was carrying enough casual intimacy to destabilize another human being before breakfast. Her dark blonde waves were loose and slightly wild from sleep. Her face still held traces of the pillow. She looked warm, soft, entirely at home, and very much like someone who had forgotten she was once supposed to be temporary. Claire took one sip of coffee and said, because self-preservation mattered, "You're doing that on purpose." Iris blinked once. Doing what? That shirt. Iris looked down at herself, then back up. Living. Claire gave her a level stare. Iris's mouth twitched. Good morning to you too. She crossed to the espresso machine with the ease of someone who now knew where things belonged. That should not have felt as intimate as it did. Claire leaned one shoulder against the marble counter and watched her move through the kitchen without asking permission from the room. She had been doing that more lately. Taking space. Claiming it. Not rudely. Not loudly. Just with the confidence of someone who had finally stopped treating Claire's home like borrowed ground. Claire found she liked it far too much. Iris reached for the espresso machine, paused, then glanced at Claire over her shoulder. You're staring. I'm observing. That sounds rich. It is rich. Iris laughed softly and started the machine. You know, normal married people don't treat morning coffee like strategic warfare. Claire considered that. Normal married people also don't get married over pool. That is still not an excuse for your personality. The espresso machine hummed. The city glowed. Iris leaned against the counter waiting for her cup to fill, one hip angled toward Claire without thinking. That, more than anything, was what kept catching Claire off guard lately. Not the kisses. Not the shared bed. Not even the way Iris had started reaching for her in sleep without waking. It was the unconscious things. The little shifts toward her. The lack of distance. The way Iris no longer seemed to expect every good moment to come with an exit. Claire set her coffee down. Iris glanced at her immediately. What? Claire lifted a brow. You're suspicious. You're looking at me like you're about to say something complicated. Would you prefer something simple? That depends. How flattering it is. That got the smallest smile out of Claire. Iris caught it. Her expression changed, softened, sharpened, both. There was always that dangerous duality with her. She could look playful and serious in the same breath, like she was deciding whether to tease Claire or tell the truth and had not yet chosen which one would do more damage. Then she picked up her cup, turned fully, and leaned back against the counter. I've been thinking. Claire went still. Iris noticed that too, obviously, because she almost smiled. Should I be concerned? Claire asked. Yes, Iris said, but in a manageable way. Claire folded one arm across her waist. That is not reassuring. It isn't meant to be. For a second neither spoke. The morning stretched around them, quiet, expensive, intimate in the sort of unguarded way that would have terrified Claire a month ago and now simply made her feel alert in all the wrong places. Iris looked down into her espresso, then back up. "It's been a few weeks," she said. Claire said nothing. Iris continued, voice quieter now, but steadier for it. "Long enough that this doesn't feel like fallout anymore." There were many possible answers to that. Claire chose the safest one. No. Iris studied her face as if checking whether that answer had cost her something to admit. Then she nodded once, almost to herself. "I don't want our first ceremony to be the only version of us," she said. Claire stopped breathing for exactly half a beat. It was enough for Iris to see. "Good. Let her see." Iris set her cup down carefully on the counter beside her. "I'm not talking about legality, or fixing anything, or proving anything to anybody." Her eyes held Claire's. "I just want one thing that actually belongs to us." Claire did not move. The apartment seemed to contract around the sentence. Iris, perhaps mistaking the silence for uncertainty, pushed forward before Claire could answer. "A small ceremony," she said. "At the gallery. After hours. Just parents, Dana, June, a few people. No contract. No dare. No drunk officiant with suspiciously fast paperwork. Just something real." Claire looked at her. Really looked. At the dark blonde waves still sleep-soft around her face. At the white shirt she had stolen and never returned. At the mouth that had once laughed at the idea of marriage and now stood in Claire's kitchen proposing a second ceremony with the calm courage of someone who had already decided she meant it. And the thing that undid Claire most was not the proposal itself. It was the lack of fear around it. Iris was not asking for reassurance. She was not testing the water. She was standing there in Claire's home, with Claire's coffee mug still warm in her hand, offering something deliberate. Something sober. Something chosen. Claire said, very simply, "Good." Iris narrowed her eyes immediately. That was too fast. Claire's mouth curved. "Was it?" "Yes." Iris folded her arms. "You were supposed to think about it." "I did." "For how long?" Claire picked up her coffee again. "Long enough." "That's incredibly annoying." Claire took a sip without breaking eye contact. "You proposed correctly." That got her a stare. A very Iris stare. Half offended, half pleased, and entirely too aware of the effect it had on Claire at this point. "There," Iris said, pointing at her with one finger. "That." "What?" "That smug look." Claire set down her mug and crossed the room slowly. Iris didn't move. Also dangerous. By the time Claire stopped in front of her, the space between them had thinned to something warm and unnecessary. "You want to marry me again," Claire said quietly. "On purpose. In your gallery." Iris lifted her chin. "You're making it sound manipulative." "I'm making it sound exact." Iris's mouth twitched. "You are being very pleased with yourself for a woman who got surprised." Claire leaned in just enough to let her answer land close to Iris's lips. "I am surprised. And pleased. There it is." Claire touched the rolled sleeve at Iris's wrist, then slid her fingers lightly down until her hand settled at the side of Iris's waist. Iris's breath changed. "Only slightly." "Enough." "You're being smug," Iris murmured. "Yes." That got her a rail laugh. Soft. Sleep-warm. Completely disarming. Claire kissed her before it could turn into another argument, slowly, not to interrupt, but to agree in a language they had become dangerously fluent in. Iris answered immediately, one hand finding the front of Claire's blouse, fingers curling there just enough to hold. The kiss lasted longer than either of them had planned. When it broke, neither moved very far. Iris looked up at her with that open, impossible expression she wore only in private now, less defiant than before, less guarded. Not softer, exactly, just more certain. "I mean it," she said. Claire brushed her thumb once over the line of Iris's waist. "I know. I want this to be ours." Claire held her gaze. "It is," she said. For one brief second, something flickered across Iris's face, something vulnerable enough that Claire almost touched her cheek, almost said something gentler than she was prepared to survive before breakfast. Instead, she kissed her forehead once and stepped back just enough to keep things from becoming a much less practical morning. Iris watched her with immediate suspicion. That was strategic. Everything before coffee is strategic. "You've already had coffee." "Exactly." Iris rolled her eyes and reached for her cup again. I hate that you're like this. Claire's smile was small and entirely unrepentant. No, you don't. Iris took a sip, then looked over the rim of the cup with wicked calm. No, she said. I don't. That should have been survivable. It wasn't. Claire turned away under the pretense of reaching for the sugar bowl she did not need. Iris naturally noticed. And because she was apparently in the mood to be unbearable before 8 a.m., she said, "We don't have to do it right away." Claire paused, then looked back. Iris had turned serious again. "The ceremony," she said. "I don't want it to feel rushed. I want us to sit with it a little. Plan it. Live with the idea." Her eyes softened. "I want it to feel real before it happens. Not impulsive." That was the sentence that finally settled it. Not because Claire had doubted her. Because Iris had understood exactly what mattered. Claire walked back to her, took the cup from her hand, set it down, and drew her in properly this time. Iris came without resistance. "Good," Claire said again, lower now. Iris smiled against her mouth before Claire kissed her a second time. This one was deeper. Warmer. Long enough to leave both of them standing too close in the middle of the kitchen while New York woke up around them, and the idea of a second ceremony took root between their bodies before it ever reached a calendar. When Claire finally pulled back, Iris kept one hand at her waist and asked, with entirely too much satisfaction, "Still pleased?" Claire looked at her for one beat, then answered with complete honesty, "Yes." Claire Donovan's office occupied the top floor of a building in Midtown that believed deeply in glass, restraint, and charging too much for bottled water. By noon, she had already finished one investor call, canceled a lunch she never wanted in the first place, and signed 3 things that probably moved an insulting amount of money from one place to another. The city beyond the windows was all steel, traffic, and precise velocity. Usually that helped. Usually, her office felt like a place where everything could still be arranged by discipline alone. Today, it felt annoyingly temporary, which Claire had begun to accept was the side effect of spending weeks going home to Iris Quinn and discovering that most places felt less compelling once you had one person who mattered more than the room. Her assistant tapped softly at the open door. Claire looked up from the papers in front of her. "Yes, your mother called," her assistant said carefully. "She said Audrey Banks may stop by." Claire's hand stilled on the page. Not dramatically. Just enough. Her assistant, wise enough not to ask questions she had no desire to answer, added, "Should I have security avoid letting anyone up without checking with you first?" Claire considered the offer, then set down her pen. "No," she said. "If Audrey Banks wants to come upstairs, she'll come upstairs." The assistant nodded and withdrew. Claire leaned back in her chair for 1 second and looked out at the city. Audrey Banks. Of course. It took no effort at all to understand how this had happened. Her mother had likely had lunch with Audrey, somewhere polished and old enough to require jackets. Someone would have mentioned the ceremony. Someone else would have framed it as a charming social curiosity. And Audrey, with that flawless instinct for entering a situation at exactly the moment she would be least welcome and most relevant, had decided to pay a visit. Claire did not want Audrey. She never had. Not really. But Audrey belonged to a version of Claire's life that people had always found neat and persuasive. They had gone to the same schools, the same winter parties, the same meaningless charity dinners with too many flowers and not enough oxygen. They had been photographed standing too close at 19, 21, 24. Not because there was anything scandalous between them. Simply because everyone loved a story that made sense. Audrey made sense. That had always been the problem. Claire was still looking out at the window when the assistant's voice came lightly through the intercom. "She's here." Claire pressed the button once. "Send her in." The door opened less than 10 seconds later. Audrey Banks entered exactly the way Claire had known she would, without noise, without hesitation, without giving the room any chance to decide whether it wanted her there. She wore a camel coat over a black dress, minimal jewelry, perfect makeup, and the expression of a woman who had never once in her life arrived somewhere feeling underdressed or underbriefed. Her dark hair was pinned back in a way that looked effortless and definitely wasn't. Everything about her was curated, so precisely it almost passed for nature. "Claire," Audrey said. "Audrey." She crossed the room with a small smile that carried just enough warmth to imply history, and just enough reserve to keep it expensive. "It's been too long." Claire rose from behind the desk because remaining seated would have read as either hostility or caution, and she was in the mood to give Audrey neither. "It has." Audrey took in the office with one glance, then returned her attention to Claire. Your mother and I had lunch. So I gathered. The corner of Audrey's mouth moved. She mentioned that you were having a small ceremony. Claire held her gaze. Yes. Audrey tilted her head almost imperceptibly, as if inviting Claire to expand. Claire did not. That, too, was an old pattern between them. Audrey waiting for the other person to fill silence with unnecessary information. Claire refusing on principle. Audrey finally stepped closer to the desk. I have to admit, I was curious. Claire's voice stayed level. About you. Of course. Not the ceremony. Not Iris. Not the gallery. You. Claire folded one arm across her waist. That's vague. Audrey laughed softly. No, it isn't. You've always done things with intention, even when other people preferred to call them impulsive. So when I heard you had married someone quickly, and were now apparently doing something smaller and more meaningful afterward, she paused. Yes. I was curious. There was no cruelty in it. That was what made Audrey dangerous. She rarely needed cruelty. She was perfectly capable of implying that a choice was beneath its own future without ever sounding rude. Claire looked at her and saw, very clearly, what Iris would see if she walked into the room right now. A woman who fit too neatly into Claire's old life, who knew her mother, who knew how to stand in expensive offices and sound like she belonged there, who looked like the kind of person everyone would have assumed Claire Donovan would marry. And because Claire had already been married for several weeks to a woman who noticed everything, the thought irritated her immediately. Audrey's eyes drifted once to Claire's left hand, to the ring, then back up. So she said, "This is real." Claire almost smiled. Not because the question amused her. Because Iris, hearing this, would have had at least 3 better replies before Audrey finished the sentence. Yes, Claire said. It is. Audrey studied her. For the first time since entering, something genuinely uncertain crossed her face. Not doubt. Recognition. Perhaps this was the first moment she had allowed for the possibility that Claire was not play-acting, not reacting, not drifting through some gorgeous little rebellion before returning to a more comprehensible version of her life. Claire saw that too. Good. Audrey touched the back of the guest chair but didn't sit. And who is she? There were at least 6 ways Claire could have answered that. She could have said, a gallery owner. She could have said, the woman I married. She could have said, none of your business. Instead, with complete and deliberate clarity, she said, Iris Quinn. Audrey waited. Claire held the silence for 1 beat longer, then added, she's the only person in this entire situation who hasn't tried to make me easier to understand. That landed. Audrey's brows rose the slightest fraction. Then, to her credit, she smiled, small, intelligent, faintly dangerous. Well, she said, that does sound more your taste than I expected. Claire almost laughed. There. That was the nearest thing to honesty Audrey had offered since walking in. A knock came at the door before either of them could say more. Dana leaned in without waiting to be invited, saw Audrey, and stopped with theatrical restraint. Dana said smoothly, I didn't realize this was a reunion. Claire did not miss the way Audrey's eyes shifted, measuring Dana, categorizing her correctly within half a second. Dana, Audrey said, with the sort of smile women used when they had met each other many times and trusted each other never. Audrey. Dana came farther into the room, one hand still on her phone, expression bright with that dangerous social intelligence she wore like perfume. I was going to steal Claire for 5 minutes, she said. But now I'm wondering whether I've interrupted a chapter from a very expensive college memory. Claire gave her a warning look. Dana ignored it immediately. Audrey turned her attention toward Dana with impeccable ease. Not at all. I was just congratulating Claire. Dana smiled. How generous. Claire stepped in before Dana could become entertaining at the expense of efficiency. Dana looked at her. Yes. 5 minutes. Dana nodded once. Of course. Then she turned back to Audrey. Lovely seeing you. Audrey's smile stayed polished. Likewise. Dana left. Audrey took one last look at Claire, and for the first time there was something almost personal in her tone. Your mother is worried, she said. Claire's face did not change. That's one word for it. Audrey reached for her gloves. For what it's worth, I don't think she's worried because she dislikes your wife. Claire said nothing. Audrey slipped one glove on, finger by finger. I think she's worried because this marriage looks like something she can't manage. She lifted her eyes again. And in this family, those are not the same thing. That was irritatingly accurate. Claire hated when other people were precise about her parents. Audrey saw that she'd landed the point and mercifully didn't press harder. At the door, she paused, then said, I imagine I'll see all of you soon. It wasn't a question. Of course it wasn't. Claire's voice stayed even. I imagine you might. Audrey gave her one final look, a complex one, impossible to reduce to disapproval or nostalgia or simple curiosity, then left. The door shut behind her. Claire stood still for a second. Then another. Then exhaled once through her nose. Dana reappeared immediately, because patience had never once improved her timing. Well, she said, closing the door behind her and coming the rest of the way inside. That was unnerving. Claire turned to look at her. You were listening. Dana looked offended. I was waiting professionally. That's not a category. It is if I'm wearing good shoes. Claire sat down again, more from habit than necessity, and reached for the pen she had set aside earlier. She did not pick it up. Dana noticed that. She still has that effect on rooms, Dana said. She always did. Dana took the chair across from the desk without asking. And on mothers. Claire let out one short breath that was not quite a laugh. Yes. Dana's expression softened. Not much, just enough. Do you want the honest read? No. Wonderful. Here it is anyway. Claire leaned back and looked at her with all the resignation of a woman who had chosen her friends poorly and late in life. Dana crossed one leg over the other. Audrey isn't here because she wants you. Not really. She's here because she represents a version of your life people still think makes sense. She tilted her head. And she probably wants to see whether Iris survives contact with it. That was, infuriatingly, what Claire had been trying not to name since the second Audrey entered the office. Dana saw the answer in her face and nodded. Exactly. Claire looked down once at the documents on her desk, then out at the city again. Iris will hate her. Dana considered. No. Iris will read her correctly in under 60 seconds and become very calm. Claire glanced back. That is not better. It is for me, Dana said. I love when Iris gets quiet. Claire's mouth moved despite herself. Dana noticed that too. Then her tone changed, just enough to sharpen. Do you want me to tell June? Claire looked at her. Dana lifted a brow. About Audrey. The mother lunch. The fact that your old life is apparently trying one last dramatic cameo before the ceremony. Claire thought about saying no. Then thought about Iris's gallery, the ceremony, her mother, Audrey's timing, and the fact that Iris deserved not to be blindsided by any part of the world that had once expected Claire to live differently. Yes, Claire said at last. Dana stood. Good. I was going to anyway. Claire closed her eyes once. You're impossible. Dana smiled on her way to the door. No. I'm useful. Then she left, already texting. Quinn Gallery looked different when it was closed and mid-preparation. Less like a business. More like the inside of Iris's mind. By the time Dana arrived, June had 3 chairs out of place, 2 boxes of candles she refused to trust, and a seating chart spread across the front desk like a military document. The front windows were half covered against the street. One ladder stood open near the back wall. Somewhere in the office, music was playing too softly to identify. June looked up as Dana came in, then looked down at the coffee Dana was carrying, then back up again. Dana set one cup on the desk and said, as if continuing a conversation they had not yet begun, "Peace offering." June eyed the cup with deep suspicion. That usually means someone wants something. In this case, Dana said, taking off her sunglasses, someone wants many things. June reached for the coffee anyway. You really do make yourself at home everywhere, don't you? Dana leaned one elbow on the desk. You're very bossy for someone who runs a front desk. June didn't miss a beat. And you're very comfortable for someone I didn't invite. Dana smiled, slow and delighted. There she is. June took one sip of the coffee, clearly decided it was annoyingly good, and narrowed her eyes as if that were somehow Dana's fault too. Why are you here? Dana glanced toward the back room, where movement suggested Iris was somewhere inside reorganizing flowers she would later claim not to care about. Then she lowered her voice. Claire's mother had lunch with Audrey Banks. June stared. The expression that crossed her face was so immediate Dana nearly laughed. June said, "That sounds expensive." "It is expensive. And irritating. Deeply." June set down the coffee. "Do I know Audrey Banks?" Dana gave that careful social pause which translated roughly to not personally, but spiritually yes. "You know the type," Dana said. "Polished. Old money adjacent. Never once in her life rushed through a doorway. The kind of woman people assumed Claire would end up with before Claire developed better taste." June absorbed that in silence, then looked toward the back room, then back at Dana. "Oh," she said slowly. "So this is not a random rich woman. This is a your mother still likes her rich woman." Dana pointed once. "Exactly." June nodded like she had just been handed a highly offensive but useful file. "And where is she now?" "Gone," Dana said. For the moment. June took another sip of coffee and looked entirely too thoughtful for someone standing behind a front desk. "Does Iris know?" "Not yet." June's mouth moved. "Should she?" Dana glanced toward the back again. "Yes." June looked down at the seating chart. "She won't panic." "No." "She'll get weirdly calm." "Yes." "That's worse." Dana smiled. "For Claire, probably." June actually laughed at that, then immediately hid it by looking annoyed. Dana watched her for one beat too long and said, "You like them?" June stared. "I am employed by one of them." That wasn't an answer. June lifted one shoulder. "I like that they're impossible in different directions." That, Dana said, is very accurate. June tapped one finger against the desk. "Audrey Banks." Dana nodded. June repeated it once like she was committing the name to future combat. "Good. I'll remember that." Dana's eyes warmed with open amusement. "Should I be worried?" "Yes," June said. "But only if she comes in here acting clever." Dana laughed. That was when Iris stepped out of the back office carrying a folded cream fabric runner in one hand and stopped mid-step. She looked from June to Dana, then to the second coffee on the desk, then back again. "I leave you alone for 20 minutes, she said, and suddenly this looks like the beginning of an argument in a lesbian novel. June didn't blink. That would require more emotional honesty. Dana turned toward Iris with entirely too much innocence. "We were discussing logistics." Iris narrowed her eyes. "No, you weren't." Dana smiled. "No, we weren't." Iris came closer, dropped the runner over the back of a chair, and looked between them with the exact expression of a woman who already knew something had entered the room and simply needed someone to say its name. Dana glanced once at June. June lifted her coffee. "Don't look at me. I enjoy chaos, but I didn't bring this one." Iris folded her arms. "What happened?" Dana took one measured breath, then said, "Audrey Banks." The effect was small. Precise. Iris's expression didn't collapse, didn't flare, didn't turn jealous in any obvious way. It just sharpened, which somehow was more dangerous. "Who," Iris asked, "is Audrey Banks?" Dana smiled very slightly because there it was, that calm. June saw it too and muttered, almost to herself, "Oh, this is going to be good." Dana took the second coffee and handed it to Iris. "Drink first," she said. Iris accepted it without looking away. Then, very quietly, "Start talking." And somewhere in the middle of the city, with the gallery half set for a ceremony and the old world already circling closer than anyone liked, the shape of the next problem finally became visible. For one long second after Dana said the name, Iris Quinn did absolutely nothing, which, in Dana's experience, was always a sign that something very interesting was happening under the surface. June noticed it too. Of course she did. She leaned back in her chair behind the desk, coffee in hand, and watched Iris with the clinical curiosity of someone who already knew she was about to enjoy the next 10 minutes more than was strictly decent. Iris took one sip of the coffee Dana had handed her, then another. Only then did she set the cup down and say, with dangerous calm, "Start with the basics." Dana folded her sunglasses and slipped them into her bag. "Audrey Banks is not an ex." June lifted one finger. "Important distinction." "Yes," Dana said. "Very." Iris's gaze stayed fixed on Dana. "So what is she?" Dana considered how honest to be and, as usual, landed on the version most likely to be useful and mildly aggravating. "She's the kind of woman people always assumed Claire would end up with." There was a brief silence. Then June said, "Ah." That one syllable contained enough judgment to furnish a townhouse. Iris looked at Dana. "Meaning?" Meaning, Dana said, they grew up in the same kind of rooms. Same schools, same circles, same events, same wealthy mothers pretending they weren't matchmaking while very obviously matchmaking. She lifted one shoulder. Nothing dramatic ever happened between them, at least not to my knowledge. No secret affair. No grand almost love. But for years, people looked at Claire and Audrey standing in the same room and thought, yes, that makes sense. Iris's face did not change much. That was the part Dana appreciated. Some women would have flared immediately. Some would have asked too quickly if Claire had wanted Audrey. Some would have started talking before they'd understood the shape of the threat. Iris did none of that. She just stood there beside the desk in Claire's white shirt, one hand around her coffee cup, and listened with the concentration of a woman assembling something sharp and private in her head. June took another sip of coffee. I already dislike her. Dana smiled. You haven't even met her. June looked offended. I have excellent instincts. That, Dana said, is unfortunately true. Iris's eyes moved once toward the front window, where the late afternoon city slid past in reflections and pale light. Then back to Dana. And Claire? Dana's expression shifted slightly. That question mattered more. Claire never talked about Audrey like she mattered romantically, she said. That's not what this is. Iris held still. Dana went on because half-truths were boring and the wrong kind of mercy. But Audrey mattered symbolically, which is worse in some ways. June lowered her cup. That sounds ominous. It is, Dana said. Audrey represents a life Claire was always expected to choose. Not because Claire wanted it. Because everyone else found it elegant and easy. Iris's mouth flattened almost imperceptibly. There it was. Not visible jealousy. Not panic. Just the quiet, precise irritation of a woman who had no interest in other people's elegant and easy expectations. June caught it immediately and said, in a tone far too casual to be innocent, so she's basically a very expensive ghost of heterosexual logic. Dana turned and stared at her for a beat. Then laughed. Iris, despite herself, almost smiled. Not heterosexual, Dana said. Just socially approved. Which can be just as annoying. June nodded. True. Iris leaned one hip against the desk and crossed her arms. And why is she suddenly interested now? Dana's mouth curved without humor. Because people like Audrey are rarely curious until something real happens. A reckless marriage? They can dismiss that as spectacle. A second ceremony, quietly planned a few weeks later. She tilted her head. That sounds permanent. That gets attention. There was the word. Permanent. It hung in the gallery for a second longer than the rest. Iris's fingers tightened once around the paper cup before relaxing again. June saw that and, mercifully for once, did not comment on it. Dana, less merciful by nature, kept going. She had lunch with Claire's mother, she said. Then she went to Claire's office. Iris's eyes lifted sharply. Today. Yes. And Claire didn't call me. The sentence came out flatter than Dana expected. Not angry. Not hurt in any obvious way. Just exact. Dana looked at her carefully. Claire may not want to make Audrey matter more than she does. June set down her cup. That sounds like a rich person mistake. Dana glanced at her. It does, yes. Iris gave a short laugh that held no amusement at all. No. That sounds like a Claire mistake. Dana watched her closely. There was no meltdown coming. That much was obvious now. But there was something else building. Something quieter. Smarter. That, in Dana's opinion, was much more dangerous to anyone standing on the wrong side of it. Iris looked down once, then back up. Tell me what Audrey is like in a room. Dana smiled faintly. Good question. Polished, she said. Controlled. Never overdressed. Never underprepared. The kind of woman who can say something insulting and have 3 people call it gracious afterward. June made a face. Disgusting. Yes, Dana said. Also very good at making concern sound like intelligence. Iris nodded slowly. Not because she was reassured. Because she was filing it away. And you, she asked Dana. Do you like her? Dana let out one short breath through her nose. No. June looked delighted. That was fast. Dana shrugged. I don't dislike her out of principle. I dislike her because she's one of those women who has gone her entire life being told she makes sense. Her eyes cooled by half a degree. And now she's walked into a story that doesn't. Iris went quiet again. Dana could practically see the line of thought moving behind her eyes now. Not did Claire ever want her? Something better. What kind of woman walks into someone else's marriage because she thinks it should have looked different? That was exactly the right question. June, apparently unable to resist, asked, "So were you, Claire, and Audrey all little rich monsters together in college?" Dana turned. "Excuse me." June lifted one shoulder. "I'm building context." Dana laughed despite herself. "No. Claire and Audrey were photographed at enough events to make people lazy. I simply had the poor judgment to know both of them at the same time." She leaned on the desk again. Claire was always harder to read than Audrey liked. Audrey prefers rooms where everyone behaves as expected. Iris's gaze stayed lowered for one beat too long. Then she asked, too casually, "Was Audrey ever in love with Claire?" Dana smiled slowly. There it was. June's eyes flicked up so fast they nearly made a sound. Dana did not answer immediately. Mostly because watching Iris pretend this was an academic question was briefly entertaining. Then she relented. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Maybe she liked the idea of Claire. A lot of people did." That landed. Iris took another sip of coffee so she wouldn't have to respond right away. June, traitorously fascinated, said, "And Claire?" Dana looked at her. No. The answer came cleanly. No theatrical pause. No teasing. Just no. Iris's eyes lifted. Dana held them. "No," she repeated. "Claire never looked at Audrey the way she looks at you. Not even close." Silence. June leaned back again and folded her arms. "Well, that seems emotionally useful." Iris did not react for a second. Then she said, very evenly, "I wasn't asking." "No," Dana said. "You weren't." That time June did smile. Iris looked at both of them with growing suspicion. "I hate how much fun you're having." June's expression became saintly. "This is not fun. This is frontline administration." Dana added, "This is what friendship looks like in expensive neighborhoods." Iris rolled her eyes and pushed away from the desk. For a moment she walked toward the back wall where the candles still sat in unopened boxes beside the chairs. She stopped there with her back half turned to them, staring at the layout she and June had been building all afternoon. The gallery looked beautiful already. Not finished. Not polished enough for Claire's mother. Not soft enough for anyone who preferred tradition over intention. But beautiful. The kind of beautiful that was earned by choosing the right things and refusing decorative lies. Dana watched Iris stand there in silence and knew exactly when the jealousy moved through her, not because it exploded, but because it settled into her posture like a decision. Iris didn't look threatened. She looked offended on Claire's behalf. Much more promising. When she turned back, her expression was composed again. Too composed. "Is she still with Claire?" Dana glanced at her phone. Then frowned. "She might be." June straightened slightly. "You know that how?" Dana held up the screen. A text from Claire's assistant. "Still here." June looked between the two women and made a deeply unimpressed sound. "That's it?" Rich people really do make secrecy boring. Dana typed something quickly and slipped the phone back into her bag. Iris looked at her. "What did you say?" "That I hate inefficiency." "That is not an answer." "No," Dana agreed. "It isn't." June's eyes narrowed. "You texted Claire's assistant?" Dana looked at her with open dignity. "Of course I texted Claire's assistant." June took a long sip of coffee. "I respect that more than I should." Dana smiled. "Most people do." Iris crossed her arms again. No fidgeting. No pacing. No jealous speech. No wounded wife spiral. She simply stood there for a second, looking toward the front windows as though the answer might already be waiting somewhere in the city. Then she said, calm as still water, "I'm going to see her." June blinked. "At the office?" "Yes." Dana watched her closely. "To do what?" Iris looked at her and, to Dana's private delight, there was now the faintest edge of something cool and dangerous in her face. Nothing dramatic. June laughed outright. "That means something dramatic in gallery owner language." Iris ignored her. Dana, however, was not so easily dismissed. "What exactly do you plan to walk in there and say?" Iris picked up her coffee again, took one final sip, then set the empty cup down on the desk with careful precision. "I don't know yet." That was a lie. All three of them knew it. Iris saw their faces and added, "I mean it. I'm not going there to make a scene." June tilted her head. "You're going there to prevent one." Iris's mouth curved faintly. Better. Dana came around the desk and reached for her coat. I'm driving. Iris looked at her. You don't have to. I know. June muttered. No one in this story knows how to mind their business. Dana ignored that and slid her arms into her coat. Besides, if this becomes memorable, I intend to witness at least the first 30 seconds. Iris gave her a long look. You're disturbingly honest. I save dishonesty for people who deserve effort. June set her coffee down and rose from the desk at last. Fine. Go. But if Iris gets arrested in a high-rise lobby, I want details. Iris stared. That escalated. June shrugged. I like to prepare for outcomes. Dana headed for the door, then stopped and turned back to June. By the way, June narrowed her eyes on instinct. What? If Audrey Banks does turn up here before we get back, be nice. June looked almost personally insulted. Absolutely not. Dana's smile widened. Good. Iris was already reaching for her bag. The ceremony plans sat half-finished on the desk. The candles were still boxed. The chairs were only mostly right. The gallery smelled like coffee, paper, and flowers not yet arranged. It struck Dana suddenly that this was exactly why Audrey would never understand what was happening. Audrey would see the rough edges, the unfinished details, the lack of polish. She would miss the part where Iris Quinn was already building something real with her own hands and had no intention of asking whether anyone else found it sensible. Iris paused at the door, fingers curled around the strap of her bag, and looked back once toward the room. Not nervously, just measuring. Then she looked at Dana and said, Don't tell Claire I'm coming. Dana smiled. Wouldn't dream of it. June folded her arms. You absolutely would. Dana looked pleased with herself. Yes. But not today. And with that, the two of them left the gallery, one amused, one quiet, both heading toward a glass tower in Midtown where an old version of Claire Donovan's life had just made the mistake of showing up uninvited. Midtown looked colder from street level. The building Claire worked in rose above the avenue in sheets of glass and disciplined ambition, the kind of place that seemed designed to remind ordinary people they were being charged for breathing near it. Dana parked at the curb with the unbothered precision of a woman who had decided years ago that rules were merely suggestions with good branding. Iris unbuckled and looked up at the building once. Then again. Dana watched her over the wheel. You're being very quiet. I'm thinking. That's never reassuring. Iris reached for the door handle. You said first 30 seconds. Dana smiled. I did. So enjoy them. That got a laugh out of Dana. Iris stepped out of the car, smoothed one hand down the front of her coat, and crossed the sidewalk without hurry. She did not storm into the lobby. She did not pause to rehearse anything. She did not need to. Because the truth was annoyingly simple. She was not here to compete with Audrey Banks. She was here because Claire was hers, and there were some rooms in which that fact had to be carried differently. The lobby was all stone, polished brass, and expensive silence. A receptionist behind the desk looked up with the expression of someone trained to identify disruption before it spoke. Iris smiled politely. Hi, I'm here to see Claire Donovan. The receptionist began. Do you have? Then stopped. Not because Iris raised her voice. Because Dana appeared beside her and set one forearm lightly on the desk with the bright elegance of a woman who treated every awkward exchange as a social puzzle she had already solved. She does, Dana said. You can call upstairs and save us all some time. The receptionist looked from one woman to the other, sensed, correctly, that resistance would only make this memorable, and reached for the phone. Less than a minute later, the elevator doors opened. Dana stepped in beside Iris and said under her breath, Just so we're clear, I'm only coming up because I'm curious. Iris kept her eyes on the closing doors. That's the least generous thing you've ever said to me. Dana smiled. I know. The elevator climbed in a hush of mirrored walls and soft mechanical confidence. Iris caught her own reflection once. Dark coat, calm face, dark blonde waves falling loose over one shoulder, eyes sharper than she'd expected them to be. Not angry. Not even afraid. Just clear. When the elevator opened, Claire's assistant was already waiting near the reception area upstairs. She took one look at Iris, then Dana, then visibly decided the smartest career move available was efficiency. Ms. Donovan is with a guest, she said carefully. Iris nodded. I know. The assistant looked surprised by the lack of drama. Dana, however, looked delighted by it. I'll wait here, she said, settling herself with impossible ease into one of the reception chairs. Unless there's an excellent reason for me to be useful in the next 60 seconds. Iris looked at her. There isn't. Dana folded her hands in her lap. Shame. Claire's office door was half closed. Not enough to hide voices. Enough to suggest privacy. Iris crossed the floor and heard Audrey before she saw her. I'm only saying that people will talk. Claire's voice answered, level as ever. People always talk. Yes, but usually for shorter periods. Iris stopped just outside the door. Not because she was rattled. Because she wanted one beat, one clean second, to hear the shape of the room before she entered it. Claire sounded composed, which meant she was irritated. Audrey sounded polished, which meant she was pushing. Good. Iris touched the door lightly and pushed it open. Claire looked up first. The effect was instant. Not theatrical. Not startling. But absolute. Whatever expression had been on Claire's face before, controlled, cool, faintly bored, changed the second she saw Iris standing there. Something in her shoulders eased. Something in her eyes sharpened. The room suddenly had a center again. Audrey turned in her chair. She was exactly as described. Beautiful in a way that belonged to old photographers and old expectations. Dark hair swept back. Camel coat folded over the guest chair, black dress, pearl earrings, posture with no wasted lines in it. Iris saw all of that in one glance. And then, more importantly, she saw Claire. Behind the desk. One hand near a glass of water she had not touched. Face composed, but just a shade too still. The kind of stillness that meant she had been handling this perfectly and not enjoying a second of it. That was enough. Claire stood. Iris. Just her name. Nothing else. But the way she said it nearly made Audrey irrelevant on the spot. Iris stepped farther into the office. Sorry to interrupt. Claire's mouth moved slightly. You're not. Audrey noticed that. Of course she did. Iris turned to her then with a pleasant expression that did not offer an inch of uncertainty. Audrey. Audrey rose too, because women like Audrey did not stay seated when another woman walked into the room carrying more reality than expected. Iris, Audrey said. For 1 second, the three of them stood in a triangle of polished manners and very different forms of territory. Then Iris crossed the rest of the room and stopped at Claire's side. Not in front of her. Not behind her. At her side. She rested one hand lightly against Claire's forearm. An easy touch. Intimate enough to be unmistakable. Natural enough to suggest it happened all the time. Claire looked down at that hand once. Then at Iris. And because Iris had known her for weeks now instead of hours, she caught the exact flash of reaction Claire hid from almost everyone else. Oh, she thought. Good. Audrey's gaze dipped to the contact and rose again. I didn't realize you'd be joining us. Iris smiled politely. Neither did I. Claire almost smiled. Almost. Audrey noticed that too and adjusted, elegantly, without appearing to. I was just leaving. No, she wasn't. Not really. But now she understood the room had changed and was smart enough to know when to concede space without calling it defeat. Iris kept her tone warm. That's generous. Audrey held her eyes for one beat longer than necessary, perhaps searching for insecurity and finding none available. Then she reached for her coat. Claire stepped around the desk to retrieve it before Audrey had to. The gesture was automatic, old-fashioned, and perfectly Claire. Iris watched it without moving her face at all. Of course Claire would do that. Of course Audrey would be the kind of woman who expected it. And of course, because the world occasionally enjoyed irony, it still irritated Iris enough that she had to tighten her fingers once against Claire's sleeve to keep the feeling from showing. Claire felt that immediately. Her hand paused very slightly on the coat. Only slightly. Then she handed it over. Audrey slipped it on with the same immaculate economy she did everything else. At the door, she looked from Claire to Iris and said, with perfect smoothness, I'm sure I'll see both of you soon. Iris tilted her head.